Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Federal court is back in session for the accused Sarah Lawrence college sex cult leader.
This was the night that she said Larry put a bag over her head and essentially threatened to waterboard her.
Plus, a murder spree just minutes from Disney World. Did a one-time physical therapist murder his wife, children, and family dog? And the accused Oxford High School shooter appears in court.
Are you okay with proceeding via Zoom?
Yes, I'm okay with proceeding.
Could the 15-year-old be headed back to school? But first, will convicted killer Scott Peterson receive a new trial? The latest developments as his defense alleges juror misconduct. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. Nearly 20 years after the murder of Laci Peterson and her unborn son Connor, husband and convicted killer Scott Peterson says he deserves a new trial. A series of evidentiary hearings continued on Thursday, where a California judge will soon decide whether Peterson should receive a new trial. It all stems from allegations of juror misconduct based on juror number 7 from Peterson's 2004 trial. Richelle Nice, dubbed Strawberry Shortcake by the media, indicated she had never been abused while filling out her juror questionnaire. Nice later admitted she was involved in multiple domestic disturbance incidents, at least one of which happened when she was pregnant. Defense attorneys say that constitutes juror misconduct and that their client should receive a new trial. A series of evidentiary hearings for that motion began in February, where Nice took the stand. She told the judge she filled out the jury forms accurately, saying she never considered herself a victim. She also said she never held the murder against Peterson, but admitted to writing to the defendant after his conviction. In 2004, Peterson was convicted for the 2002 murder of wife Laci and unborn son Connor. He was sentenced to death, but the California Supreme Court later threw out that ruling. He was then resentenced to life in prison. Peterson has maintained his innocence. Let's see if we can shed some more light on the question of new trial or not. Joining us today is legal analyst Kirk Nurmi and Terry Austin. Kirk, is there any end in sight to this question of whether or not Peterson will get a new trial, and when can we expect a decision?
Well, to answer the last part of your question first, Brian, I think it's going to take a while. I mean, we have a complicated matter here. The court's docket is probably being full with some of those trials that were backed up during the pandemic, is going to have to look at the transcript that Miss Nice, or what she said during voir dire, during the original testimony, compare that to her testimony, and take a really good deep dive into the law, because this isn't the kind of decision that can be rendered in 1 or 2 sentences. And the judge knows that whatever his or her decision is going to be, that ultimately is going to be appealed. So he or she is going to want that ruling to be well reasoned. So while we might get an answer within a few months as from the trial court, the ultimate answer isn't going to be decided until the Court of Appeals weighs in on this issue, I suspect.
So it seems like more rounds of legal procedures as we continue. Terry, if Peterson is granted a new trial, what are the next steps?
You know what? The case is going to go back to square one, literally back to square one. We'll have pretrial hearings, pretrial motions, and I guarantee you one of those motions will be to let his client out on his own recognizance, because we know that Peterson's been in jail, and that will be the first thing they want to do. There'll be discovery. They'll be looking for more documents. There'll be depositions, so that each of the attorneys basically can impeach the witnesses once again based on yet more depositions, et cetera. So I think it'll help the defense overall, because they will be able to see what the prosecution is going to do. They've already seen the case, and my humble advice to the prosecution is leave no stone unturned, because you will need all the evidence possible.
Yeah, and if there is a new trial, we're probably going to see an extensive voir dire in terms of not only the questionnaire, but also in questioning of the prospective jurors. Thank you both. Switching now to news out of the Caribbean, where the private islands of the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein are for sale with a $125 million asking price. Attorneys for Epstein's estate say the money from the sale will go towards several outstanding legal cases, including a civil racketeering lawsuit. In 2020, the Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands filed a suit against Epstein's estate and attorneys. The complaint states in part, quote, Epstein, through an associate with defendants, trafficked, raped, sexually assaulted, and held captive underage girls and young women at his properties in the Virgin Islands. Right now, Epstein's attorneys and the U.S. Virgin Islands government are in talks for a settlement. In 2019, Epstein died by suicide in a jail cell as he faced numerous charges of sex trafficking. And in December of last year, Epstein's longtime companion, Ghislaine Maxwell, was found guilty of sex trafficking in relation to her time with Epstein. And in celebrity news, former child star Amanda Bynes is released from a court conservatorship after nearly 9 years. On Tuesday, a judge ruled the 35-year-old is competent to manage her own affairs, from finances to medical treatment. This comes just months after pop star Britney Spears was released from her highly publicized conservatorship. While Spears received pushback as she attempted to end the conservatorship, Bynes' parents agreed with the decision to end hers. Bynes had originally been placed under the conservatorship at age 27 after multiple arrests and drug and alcohol abuse. That's when her parents voiced concern that she may hurt herself or others unless they were given control of her finances and medical care. Bynes now maintains she is sober. She first rose to fame as a child star on the TV channel Nickelodeon, where she starred in such shows as The Amanda Show. Still ahead on Law&Crime Daily, just miles from Disney World, prosecutors say a man murdered his wife, 3 children, and family dog. But first, the accused Michigan high school shooter appears in court, how he could be headed back to school from behind bars. Welcome back. The accused Oxford High School shooter appears in court virtually on Wednesday, where a Michigan judge rules he will remain in the Oakland County Jail for adults. Because suspect Ethan Crumbley is only 15 years old, monthly check-in hearings will be held to reevaluate whether he should be moved to the Children's Village. Crumbley is charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and terrorism stemming from a November 2021 shooting spree at Oxford High School. 4 students were killed and others injured. Crumbley's parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley, are also charged in connection to the shooting with involuntary manslaughter. Officials say Crumbley's parents ignored warning signs of the shooting, such as disturbing drawings and calls to see a therapist. On Thursday, Ethan Crumbley appeared virtually in court, where his guardian ad litem discussed a plan for his future schooling.
To implement either the high school equivalency program or a GED. And additionally, that would, once he has achieved either the high school equivalency diploma or the GED, he then would be able to continue in that program to be able to do some community college courses. Ms. George indicated that she has talked with Captain Vita about being able to provide him his own laptop to be able to have, a certain block of time every day for him to be able to work on that program. I did speak with him yesterday. He is thinking about what path he wants to proceed with, but the earliest that we can start implementing that would have to be after his 16th birthday, which is in approximately another month.
All right, before we've talked about the School of Terry Austin, so who better to break down the latest Crumbley hearing than our own co-host Terry Austin and legal analyst Kirk Nurmi. Terry, what are your thoughts on the educational components of Crumbley's pretrial detention?
Prison education is not a guaranteed right under the Constitution. It certainly is not an enumerated right, but it is considered something that most prisoners do get, particularly if you are in primary education, if you are not an adult. And I think that here we see that they're arguing to give him education because he is not an adult. And I think he probably should get that education depending on how long he's going to be in prison. And we know if he's, going to be in prison for quite some time, these are horrible crimes that he's committed. So I think that they are making the right arguments. And I think that he probably should get an education while he is in prison.
Yeah. Now, Kirk, I understand it's Michigan law, but I'm still kind of asking the question, why monthly check-ins? And what is the court expecting could change from now to the next court date that would make a juvenile jail more appropriate here?
Well, ultimately, Brian, I don't think there's anything that could happen in this case that could alter the course of Mr. Crumbley's confinement. You're right. There's statutory required that review every 30 days, but given the horrific nature of this crime, I don't see the court ever changing his pre-trial incarceration. And think about it this way, Brian, too. He's beginning to seek out fame. He's got these ideas of his fan mail, seeking out his fan mail and his Harry Potter book. You put him in an environment with other juveniles, and he could become a bit of a folk hero because of this fame, because of the money he has in his commissary account. And all those things combined, I could not see a judge, and Judge Rowe in this case, changing the conditions of his confinement at all. I think he will spend his life in the adult prison.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying get rid of these check-ins. I'm saying maybe 3 to 6 months, but why month after month after month? It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. But we'll keep track of these hearings and others in the Ethan Crumbley case. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, how the health of accused Sarah Lawrence cult leader Lawrence Ray is affecting his federal trial. Plus, a grisly murder scene in the shadow of Disney World. Why prosecutors hope to block the insanity defense for the man accused of murdering his wife, young children, and family dog. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. Prosecutors in Florida try to block the insanity defense for a man accused of murdering his wife, 3 children, and family dog just miles from Disney World in December 2019. Anthony Todt has pled not guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty. Todt was taken into custody in January 2020 after investigators discovered the dead bodies of his family members and dog inside a Celebration, Florida home. At the time, officers were attempting to arrest Todt, a physical therapist, on healthcare fraud charges. Investigators believe the Todt family's bodies were inside the home for weeks before they were found. Autopsy results found they died of stab wounds and lethal amounts of Benadryl. While Todt initially confessed to the murders, he later blamed his wife, Megan, for the deaths. Prosecutors are now trying to prevent Todt from using an insanity defense, filing a motion that would limit the evidence presented by the defense about Todt's mental health status. As of now, no filings about the insanity defense have been made. After multiple delays, Todt's case is expected to go to trial on April 4th. Law and Crime Network will be in the courtroom to bring you gavel-to-gavel coverage. Legal analysts Kirk Nermy and Terry Austin are back as we look ahead to the Law and Crime's upcoming trial coverage. Terry, do you think the prosecution will be able to block the defense from asserting an insanity defense?
You know, I don't think he's going to prevail on that motion. Listen, based on this indictment and based on the crime itself, clearly that is a legitimate defense. Whether or not it prevails, we will see. Under Florida law, they can claim insanity, but they're obviously going to have to prove there's a mental illness. And because of that mental illness, they didn't know what they were doing, or they didn't understand that it was wrong. And so it's a burden. It's got to be clear and convincing, and it's the burden that the defense is going to have to carry. So I think the judge is going to actually deny that motion, allow the defense, and leave it to the jury to determine whether or not there is insanity in this case before, during, or after the commission of the crime.
Yeah, Kirk, the defense usually doesn't have to prove anything, but Terry is touching on a great point here. It seems like a lot of heavy lifting because supposedly there's a false confession and now a potential insanity defense. What does the defense have to prove or show to make these arguments work?
Well, you know, it's not a matter of necessarily proving anything, except, of course, with the insanity defense, it has to be proved. But a confession is obviously some of the most damning evidence a defendant can face. But it doesn't have to be faced alone, if you will, when we talk about the issues, the evidence that are advanced in insanity defense, and how that might affect someone's ability to confess. So what the defense will be trying to do is demonstrate that that confession obtained isn't as credible as it might otherwise be. So you put a false confession expert up on the stand to raise doubt, to raise that reasonable doubt regarding the veracity of the confession, along with all the other evidence to show that he really didn't properly confess. So that's what the defense is going to be trying to do here, to cast doubt on everything the state is advancing forward because of his mental state.
Yeah. As I said again, make sure to check out the Law and Crime Network for gavel-to-gavel coverage on that trial. And in Ohio, testimony wrapped up for the week on Thursday in the case of accused killer William Husel. The former ICU physician is on trial for allegedly killing patients with excessive amounts of fentanyl. The 14 deaths he's charged with happened between 2015 and 2018. Husel's defense team argues the former doctor was giving end-of-life comfort care to the patients he was treating. Husel faces 15 years to life on each count if convicted. Over the last 5 weeks, the state's case has focused on the amounts of medicine Husel ordered nursing staff to administer to patients. Jurors have heard from Husel's former co-workers at Mount Carmel Hospital and from family members of several of the alleged victims. Thursday's testimony included the daughter of Melissa Penix, the woman whose death reportedly sparked the initial investigation into Husel.
I said, if there's no hope, if there's nothing you can do, if there's no hope, why was something being put in her arm when we walked in? And he said, oh, we never stopped trying.
What happened after the discussion about withdrawing care?
Well, we talked about it as a family, and considering that none of us are medical experts, and if a doctor tells you that your loved one's brain dead, I had no idea whatsoever why you would doubt him, because they're the educated one. So we accepted that, and as a family, we decided to have the event removed.
When we come back, the Sarah Lawrence College sex cult trial. Alleged cult member Claudia Drury is back on the stand for the third time. Our Adam Klasfeld is at the courthouse with the latest developments. Welcome back. Intense testimony on direct examination of a key witness finishes up in the case of accused Sarah Lawrence sex cult leader Lawrence Ray at a New York federal courthouse. This comes after the trial was put on hold for a day when the defendant was rolled out of court on a stretcher and taken to the hospital. Ray faces several federal charges, including racketeering, sex trafficking, and money laundering, all stemming from alleged abuse and the extortion of his daughter's college friends for over the last decade. One of his alleged victims, Claudia Drury, began her testimony on Friday, telling jurors Ray gained control over her through threats and violence. She shared testimony of him allegedly hurting her and threatening to hurt people she knew, even her family. Drury testified she turned to sex work to pay Ray back after he had convinced her she had tried to poison him and that she had damaged his New York apartment. Moments after Drury's testimony Tuesday about Ray allegedly urging her to take steps to make herself more desirable to men, he was taken from the courthouse and driven to the hospital by an ambulance. Court resumed on Thursday, and Law&Crime's Adam Klasfeld was back in the courtroom as Drury's testimony continued with details from the, quote, night of torture back in 2018.
When opening statements kicked off, the prosecutor had said about an incident that she described as a long night of torture. Claudia Drury said that essentially in late 2018, she was at the Gregory Hotel in Midtown Manhattan when Larry Ray entered with his accused co-conspirator, Isabella Pollack. This was the night that she said Larry put a bag over her head, started to suffocate her, ordered her to strip down, and took her in her restrained state to an air conditioner and poured water over her head. It was horrifying testimony. She says that she learned after this night of torture that she describes, that she said lasted between 7 and 8 hours, that it was being recorded by Larry's accused co-conspirator. We heard an audio recording of that in court. And I have to tell you, when that was being played, you could see the witness tilting her head back, putting her head forward. It was clearly a painful recording for her to listen to. So this was very dramatic testimony, very emotional testimony to kick off the end of her direct examination.
This is purely speculation. I'm not saying that these trips to the hospital aren't real, but we've heard testimony of Ray's history of manipulation. Now we're seeing health-related delays when the star witness is testifying. Then he's fine a day or two afterwards. Is that a little suspicious to you?
A little suspicious to me as the same as you, but I bet most importantly to his case, the jury is probably pretty suspicious of this. Think about all the things they've heard that he's capable of in terms of manipulating these women, what have you. And now we're talking about, when testimony against him is presented, he's suddenly sick and then he's coming back. Yeah, this is not a good look. You're only going to upset the jurors, and I'm sure they're thinking the same thing that we are both thinking, Brian.
Again, just speculation. I'm not his doctor. I don't know, but seems a little odd to me is what I'm saying. Terry, it seems like the defendant recorded most of the acts involving his alleged victims. Why do you think he would create incriminating evidence that could be used against him later?
You know, if I were the prosecutor, I would argue that the reason he took those tapes is, one, he was displaying that horrific behavior, but he wanted to go back and further humiliate his victims. And so he taped all of this. And I think that's an added level of horribleness to this crime. And I think he also derived, or at least if I were the prosecution, I would argue that he derived some sort of pleasure in not just doing the act, but actually taping the act. And it's really great for the prosecution. Usually in these types of cases, it's he said, she said. Now that they have these tapes, there's no question they have very clear evidence on what was going on. And I think they'll be able to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt to this jury seeing these tapes.
Yeah, the tapes are really damaging. And of course, it gives a greater insight to this mindset of Lawrence Ray. Kirk, Terry, thank you as always. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.